I'm thrilled to welcome Tori Williams to the show. Tori is an animal welfare leader with experience directing shelter veterinary services, opening a community veterinary hospital, and serving as COO of a national organization focused on pet well-being. She now consults with shelters and animal organizations on building resilient teams, reducing burnout, and creating sustainable, compassionate programs. Hi, and welcome to Dog Fostering 101. I'm Jackie Adams, foster mom and learning and development professional. This podcast is for anyone who's new to fostering, thinking about saying yes for the first time, or navigating those early days and looking for practical tips, because fostering changes lives at both ends of the leash. Tori, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this topic.
So many fosters say, I didn't expect this to affect me so deeply. From your perspective, why are fosters more vulnerable to compassion fatigue?
Yeah. Well, I think first it's because it comes from a place of such passion, right? They're choosing to foster, they're choosing to get more involved in their local shelter, assuming it's local. And with that, they are investing in this animal, investing in this organization, but they don't usually have control of that outcome. So all of these feelings of excitement and passion and all of this sometimes can get a little misconstrued because they don't necessarily get to have the final say in what happens with the animal. And then lastly, I think it's a bit of a routine mental game because this animal is now in your home. It's part of your routine, it's part of your day-to-day life, but it's not your animal. And so you almost have to do this fake goodbye to it, but it's still in the world. And you're just having to hope, assume, maybe even get the feedback that it's living its best life somewhere else. But it's this kind of strange, I love this. It's in my routine. I say kind of goodbye. I hope for the best. And I don't really know what happens sometimes at the end of the day. So I think it makes complete sense that the burnout or problems, it all tracks for me. Like the puzzle pieces fit together in that regard. So
Oh, for sure. And what I appreciate about what you're saying is that I mention to people a lot of times, if you are like me and I travel a decent amount, so I don't feel like it would be fair for me to have a resident dog, or I've got, so much going on in different capacities, I wouldn't be the best full-time owner. So I talk about the benefits of fostering, and having this dog, walking them in your home and treating them like they're your own dog, versus what you're saying makes complete sense. Then I have that emotional investment of treating them like my own dog, and yet they're not, and what comes on the other side of that. So that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. And I think there's obviously so many positive, more than enough, so many unlimited amount of positive things. The thing I would say too is even though it's not your dog and you have it for such a short amount of time, I try to tell people teach them how to be a pet, teach them how to dog, teach them how to cat, because that is something that is going to set them up for success in the future, more so than an animal who maybe has never been into foster, went straight from one setting into a more stressful setting and then into a new setting, giving them that rest and relax time. And I think that's probably something else that creates burnout, right? Because you might take in an animal who's very scared or, whatever it is. And then you get to see them overcome that. And then you just have to give them to somebody else. And you're I hope they can do it. I know my last foster was the snuggliest dog ever. And all I could think was I hope whoever takes this dog is ready for this sweet, sweet little lady, not little, she was huge, to want to be in their skin. This dog would not, you know what I mean? And then what I could do, the only real control I had was to tell the shelter so that they could make sure as they're adopting her out to say, this dog is a cuddler times 100. And I don't know obviously what home she went to, but I just would like to believe that she is on someone's couch, just living her absolute best life. And that whoever took her was yes, that is what I want. I want a dog that is attached to me, as a Velcro to me. But that makes it even harder sometimes when they're, you get to see that change.
Of course,
that you created it. Yeah.
That's what us fosterers do, right? We collect those really good behavior notes in hopes that we can match them with the right foster family. And I just brought home a dog yesterday. Right now I'm fostering with the Union County Humane Society. And I suggested, and the staff agreed, that we're going to be renaming him because he was left in the backyard. He's 2 years old, but we were calling Mocha, Mocha, and he wasn't responding. He just had no name association just
Mhm.
because he had been mostly left to his own. And this really became obvious when I tried to bring him into my house. And he looked at these stairs, and when I walked up these 3 steps, he's like, "What are you doing?" And
Yeah.
then you see him like tentatively putting his little paw out,
Aw.
and then like
Mhm.
he like jumped up on the second step, and then he kind of like back. So
Yeah.
it's this introduction to so much new, like you're saying, that
Mhm.
we're that exposure, that we're that bringing them in, teaching them how to dog again, and getting
Mhm.
to see that, and then knowing that that's the preparation that we're doing. And so now he's also a big Velcro boy, and
Of
so
course.
yeah, I'm trying to see if I can, this will be a fun way of engagement. I haven't done this before, but I'm trying to see if one of the local elementary schools wants to actually help rename him, since we just want to give him
Oh,
a fresh start. So we'll see how that goes.
love
But
it.
it'd just be a nice way to engage with the students and get them
Mhm.
involved with some of the rescues in our area. Back to the topic at hand before we go too far with our foster stories.
Yeah.
When we're talking about this compassion fatigue, have you noticed any early signs of this that we can keep an eye out for it? So I think sometimes it can often get mistaken for something else, like whether that's frustration with the shelter or the staff, or guilt, or thinking that maybe they're just not cut out for fostering. What should we keep an eye on as volunteers, as fosterers, when we might be having compassion fatigue and not realizing it?
Yeah. I would say the one that I have personally seen in my previous teams we would talk about comes a lot of times in the way that a foster speaks to the staff. And not that they're going off the handle, but more like the things that wouldn't usually be a big deal, like wait times or a mix up, all of a sudden become like extremely frustrating. And I think if you think about burnout like holistically as people, right? Like they say that when like little things that are we know are little or seemingly little become big in our minds, like that's usually a sign that something's up. So I would say that's one is if you find yourself like walking into the building or talking to staff and you're kind of like already at that like level 6, 7, 8, you know what I mean? Like kind of up there, like maybe just like take a minute, take a breath and think like, why am I so frustrated? Like, why is this like just creating this effect for me? The second I would say is when I see a shift in fosters that go from they're trying so hard to be understood, they're forgetting to be understanding. And all of a sudden these conversations go from like, "Oh, why is that?" Or, "Oh, that doesn't how can you help me understand that?" to "You're wrong," like kind of those big words, right? And I think that to me from my experience like that's but when I start to think, "Hey, we might need to have just like a quick sidebar. No one's in trouble." It's more of a like, "Hey, are you okay?" Like this is something that, we've is not like you. And I think for most people that kind of helps them take a step back and break out of it. I mean, I have an example of this. We had again, this is years ago, but we had a foster who she was really well known for taking really challenging litters of kittens, like questionable health litters, where you were like, I don't really know what's going to happen here. But that was her thing. She always did it. The staff would call her directly and say, can you please take these kittens? And the staff and her had a couple kind of like challenges, I would say. So then shortly then the staff stopped calling her, which then frustrated her even more. And then ultimately the effect there is the animals, because it became like, well, we don't want to send her with really challenging kittens because it seems like they're affecting her more than usual and like we're having trouble with communication. And so then ultimately, you know, challenging litters were going elsewhere, but she's the one with all the knowledge. Like she had the most knowledge. So it was challenging, I would say, in that regard. And I think that if you as a foster are feeling a shift ever in that, like ask a question from a pure place of curiosity and understanding. I think any shift like that, it's worthwhile to ask the question and just see. But I think, obviously we don't know what happens at home, but I would say the communication in that, when you start to see that shift, is when, for me, I would want to say, like, hey, we doing okay? Like that, and saying it as a compliment, right? Like, this is so unlike you. That's why I'm asking, not because I'm like, hey, stop that. I'm like, this is not like you to be this reacting in this way or like pushing really hard on this one thing that you've never pushed on before or whatever it is. And coming from the staff to a place of care and concern, not never a we're all people, right? Like we should all be caring for each other, and especially in such an emotionally charged situation as this. So, um, yeah, I would say those are my two kind of like when I start to be like, something's a little up here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that was one thing that really surprised me about this volunteer work. Because I've done a lot of volunteering in my past, as a Peace Corps volunteer, and then I went straight into a lot of different nonprofits and worked with Girl Scouts and just a lot of different organizations. And I am like, I've done this, philanthropy for like 20, 25 years, but I've never seen people get, and some of them are really serious, really hard hitting topics, but I've never seen the level of, in some ways, what I'd call emotional investment. And then that kind of ignites these conversations. But I think what you're saying makes sense to me because if we as fosterers are welcome these into our home, welcome these doggos into our home, and we're emotionally invested in them in a unique way because they're with us, and then the staff are also emotionally invested, and then they also get the other side too. That sometimes when I go into the shelter, I see our staff getting yelled at by members of the public because they're frustrated by the wait times because our setup isn't set up. And so, for the number of dogs coming in or animals have to be turned away and people are learning about this and it's frustrating for them. So there's just this heightened emotion with this. But I like what you're saying. And I really like that emphasis on care for the human and concern and like, hey, if this happens, then I need to pause, which I'm not always the best at, is like, not reacting in that moment, but pausing and checking in with that person. What a beautiful way to reframe it. And what a good skill to reminder of how we should engage with others overall, too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's being proactive too, from like the foster side of things is like, it, as you said, this is an emotionally charged situation. Things happen, words get said, whatever it is. And it's like, you are also being proactive and being like, oof, sorry about that. I just care about this animal so much. And like kind of getting back to level setting because the staff in these shelters are also there because they are emotionally invested, like we're all on the same team. And I think sometimes when it comes to challenging cases or, outcome decisions, whatever it is, it starts to feel like we're not on the same team. And to me, like the quicker that we can get back to being like, you love animals, I love animals, we're choosing to be here. Let's like find common ground is, I think really important. And though, yes, of course, the staff should be doing it. I would also encourage foster parents though, to like take a little bit of an inventory, right? Like, I know for my team, like my foster team, they were young, like they were in their 20s, and so they might still be learning how to be professionals in this industry or regulate their emotions. Like I think at some point someone has to be the level setter, the grown up, whatever it is. And not that, all situations are these like big emotional explosions, but I think for me, like the thing that I can control as somebody who's been on both sides is like, I can be the level setter. I can be the one to be, the bigger person, the one to say like, hey, you're the messenger. I totally understand that. I'm really frustrated by this decision though. Is there somebody else I can speak to? Again, you're great. Appreciate you. It's like when you call into a call center and they're like, no, no. And you're like, this isn't your choice. And I do want to, but I do need to understand why you won't let me cancel my membership, whatever it is.
Of course.
So I think just remembering that too, as you're talking to folks, like someone has to be the level setter and like, why not it be you?
Yeah. And
listening to this.
I think talking about that is a great way to step up because one thing I've noticed, and this doesn't happen all the time, but I've heard it happen occasionally where I hear staff or fosterers or volunteers talk about this and they're like, well, we have to, at the end of the day, remember it's all about the animals. And I'm like, yes, and yes, we can be all about wanting to help these animals and we can show compassion towards people too. It's not like if you choose the animal, then you just bulldoze over these people, and then that's going to get your long-term solution. I was like, I think, my opinion, having had some conversations where I wish I would have shown up differently in the past, is that was an easy thing for me to escape, so I didn't have to do that meant emotional grounding on my side. That was an easy way for me to excuse, justify my behavior. And when I thought about it afterwards, I was like, that's not going to set us up for success. That's not going to have more fosters, volunteers long term and have other people want to be a part of this, nor is it how I want to show up in my day to day. So, how can I love on these dogs and create compassion towards people? Because I really think dogs, the whole reason why I kind of started this thing was because I really think dogs do a great job of helping us understand compassion in a different way. And I want to leverage that in my relationships with people,
Exactly.
not use it as an excuse not to even
Right.
try.
Yeah. Well, it's like one can't exist when it comes to staff and fosters. It's like one can't, I mean, it could exist, but you know what I mean? Like, in order to make, if we can think about it as like we're both part of one community, whether that's organizationally, we're part of this organization, or even just like animal welfare as a community as a whole. Like, I think too, sometimes that gets missed because it almost becomes a like us versus them, or like we're the
Yeah.
volunteers. And it's like, well, we're the staff. And it's like, guys, we're all like, we all are have the same, we're all choosing to be here. Like, I think that's a big piece to remember, because we care about this deeply. Like, there's lots of other careers that pay a lot more money from a staff perspective that people can go into. They're here because they also care. And so it's like, and same for the fosters, right? They're like, I could be using my free time to do a million things, including not volunteering for anybody or volunteering across the street. It's like, how do we just remember at the end of the day, like, we are a community? And I think sometimes it's like, we're all behind the mission. Yes, of course. But most of the time the mission is like, yay, animals. Like, of course. But how can we be a community of people and remember that, like, and that because people are people. So it's like, yes, you're allowed to have that bad day and you're allowed to be emotionally frustrated. And maybe you're even allowed to say something that you shouldn't have said or come off in the way you didn't mean to. But then, are you the kind of person who would then proactively say, hey, this is, my bad. I shouldn't have said that. I didn't mean that. Like, of course, there's like layers to that, right? But,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like, if you come in and you're just like, I can't believe you're doing this, you can have that emotional reaction. But then, can you say, like, that was a big feeling. That wasn't intended for you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry that, but I also, and I can feel sorry for this news and for this person. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. So, yeah.
And that's a good call out too, because I'm talking about it in terms of, I want to remember at the time to pause and to, try to keep an eye on my reaction. But you're absolutely right. Even if I am not able to be the person that I want to be in that moment, nothing in the world, except for my pride, is keeping me from following up a little bit later or the next day or whenever it is and letting the person know, hey, that wasn't my best moment. And I
Yeah.
didn't mean to write that towards you. So I like that you called that out.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about too. So obviously, in not all areas across the U.S., but in many areas at this point in time, a lot of shelters are at or near capacity. The need is big, and so what I've noticed in discussions with the fostering groups that I'm participating in is that fosters often feel torn between
Mhm.
wanting to help more and then also needing to protect themselves, needing to protect their families, their work life balance. What does creating that kind of healthy boundary look like for fosters, do you think?
Yeah. I think first it's being really honest with yourself, what can you take on right now? And then, with taking that on, how does that like ripple into the rest of your life? Gonna bore you with my own personal example. The same dog who was a Velcro dog, like, so
Hmm.
my last foster, she was so wonderful, but they didn't, she was like maybe okay with cats. We weren't really sure. We figured out quickly she was not okay with cats. It was affecting my cat, like, because my personal cat was now having to like stay kind of tuckered away in a room. And it was so hard for me because I felt so torn in these things. And I had to think back to like, why did I originally get into doing this? And it was that I love animals and I want to be able to help them. And so I had to kind of like have that internal dialogue of like, well, I'm helping this dog who's like now sequestered to a part of my house, whatever it is. So what I did in that moment, because I was really struggling, is I reached out to the organization and I said, hey, I can't keep her for too much longer because of the stuff with the cat, which I will provide great notes on for the future home.
Yeah.
And I also feel terrible bringing her back to the shelter to sit in a cage. could you find a foster? Could you help me or, find a foster that it could go home to home? And that wasn't like their typical, but I mean, I put it all out there with my emotions. I was ready for them to just be like, you can bring her back. I mean, they did. They were like, yes, and we don't know how long it'll take. You can bring her back. So we ended up, it worked out just fine. But that being said, I give that example because I think it's important for you to have that internal understanding of what is your boundary and how does that ripple effect go on. From there, I would say two things. One of which is be really proactive with that with the shelter. If you are having those, hopefully that relationship kind of exists. And even if it doesn't, I think it's okay to share like, hey, I'm really starting to struggle here. Like I'm starting to feel a little burnt out, or like, I've learned that I can only do these types of animals or whatever it is. Getting really clear about that and upfront is going to be helpful. Perhaps they can take you off the list for a few weeks where you're not getting those email blasts being like, please help us. Perhaps they're saying, okay, let's not send you with any more medical dogs. We do have a longest stay cat. Could you do that? Maybe it's just a matter of like shifting what you typically commit to. But I think having that conversation, I mean, the shelter folks should be able to chat with you, right? Whether it be like, yeah, let's go for a full break. Let's take you off the email list. Like, let us know when you're ready to come back, or be able to say like, could we try this? Could we try that? In that same regard, I think you can do a lot of good by being in the shelter too. So I think a lot of times fosters think like fostering is what I do to help this shelter. And that is important. But could you be just as impactful and effective by going into the shelter for a few hours a week and helping with dog walking, doing enrichment, helping in some other place in the shelter that has a more definitive like start and end time, and trying those different things? Because I think when in my experience, when fosters would say that like they were really struggling and they felt like you guys need so much and I don't want to be the one to pull away. We can also use help just walking the dogs for 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon. That is also helpful. Helping to stuff peanut butter into Kongs, also helpful. And maybe it's just that you need a full removal. Can you help recruit other fosters? That was something
Mhm.
I would use. That was kind of like a tool in our toolkit, because it was like, what if we build up fosters in this specific area so that you don't feel as pressured, and that maybe you can still feel like you're doing good and doing all the things, but it's not a direct animal kind of impact. And that was wonderful, because what we found was that a lot of our fosters who would burn out, they took usually very specific things like kittens and failing health, or dogs coming out of surgery, who needed like really hands-on care or behavior care. And so then it was like, well, why don't we focus on that and say, hey, we're looking for behavior fosters, and this is what we can do, and this is the training we can provide. And we gave them a bunch of flyers and said, go forth, and at least that they felt like they were still doing something while they tried to kind of take that step back. So I would say, in summary, like, get creative, talk to the shelters, be proactive, and then get creative of how you can provide continued help, even if it doesn't look exactly the way that you thought it might.
And one thing that's really resonating with me from what you're saying here is sometimes I get overwhelmed by how big this problem is. It's a systematic problem that's happening in many shelters and rescues throughout the US. People are getting burnt out. And when I look at the size and scope of that problem, I'm like, well, what can I do? I can't save them
Yep.
all, et cetera. And then I like what you're saying of, but I can do this one thing. This thing, if I
Mhm.
focus my attention, focus my energy, or like you said, if I take a break or if I get off the email list, I like that you have several specific tangible solutions. But I haven't heard that one before. And I like that idea. I'm just going to focus my energy on this one very finite thing that I know I can just move it forward a little bit
Yeah.
while I'm building myself up back up. Really
Yeah.
like great tip there. And
Recruiting
speaking
other
of it, oh, good.
Oh, I was just say recruiting other fosters feel is like a very tangible, I brought in 5 other fosters, or you know what I mean? Like when
Mm,
when we had this issue, and it was again specific to medical big dogs. We went and we worked with the team in the shelter, and with the fosters who were really passionate about this, and we created like a whole, and again, you don't have to go this big, but like a marketing campaign of like, we need these types of fosters. And that at least felt like we were doing something, like we were not just being like, well, shucks, like if only. It was like, no, we're going to create some really nice marketing materials, we're going to get on our social media, we're going to be very clear. And then we had and if you still can't foster, we get it, come walk dogs with us. You can't come walk dogs with us, we would love some Kongs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we really tried to make it like, if you are seeing this, there is a way you can help, even if it doesn't look like the very top need. Cause that's a big need that I think almost all shelters recognize. And I can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, lots of people are like, I have my own pets, or I travel a lot like you. Like, they don't always have that ability. And so how can we keep them involved in the mission and with the problem in a very tangible and like accomplishable way?
Yeah, and this question does come up. I do a lot of speaking. I recently spoke at the Rotary Club of Waxhaw Weddington, and that was one of the first questions that came up. Somebody raised their hand and said, "I can't foster just because of my life circumstances where I'm at right now. What else can I do?" And I'm like, "Oh gosh, I can't believe I did a whole PowerPoint thing and I didn't include that as one." Like, it's not like it's binary, 1 or 0. You either do
Mhm.
foster or you don't care about these doggos,
Yeah.
etc. So I was like, "Great question. I'll add that in, and here are some options that you can consider over." So
Yeah.
yes, yeah, great call out.
Mhm.
I wanted to touch on, because you've kind of mentioned, and I appreciate the specific ways of dealing with it, but with this guilt that we as fosterers can theme, this can be a big theme in fostering. Guilt about saying no to a specific foster dog, especially when a lot of people have fallen in love with it and we want to see them out of the shelter. Taking breaks from fostering, there can be guilt. Returning a dog to the shelter, or even just like realizing that we can't save them all. You've
Mhm.
talked about what we can do, but I'm curious if you have any tips about how we can reframe this in our mind as fosters, that guilt that we can sometimes experience.
Yeah, I think, there's one thing that I will say that's sometimes is not as popular, but I'll just say it anyway. I think sometimes as animal welfare volunteers, professionals, whatever, we have to remember who else we are as people. I think the guilt and the problem and how big the problem is and all the things we can do and our social media and what we know about this and our whole life and all of our friends and all we talk about is this, like, that is going to just continue these feelings times just continuously. Like, it's just going to keep going, keep going, keep going. So anytime I've worked in animal welfare with volunteers or staff, I would say, like, tell me who you are other than a foster, animal lover. Like, talk to me about what else you do and who else you identify as. And I think that when it comes to those feelings of guilt, all those feelings are valid. But what I would say is, like, can you set up your surrounding in a way, even if it's just temporarily, to think about do other things? A lot of fosters and staff, they're all just like highly compassionate people, and they're usually compassionate about more than just animals. And again, I'm not saying like quit the shelter, go over here, but is there something else that maybe you could go help at a food bank, or is it somewhere you could do some stuff on your own that is not volunteering at all? Maybe it's painting, whatever it is. I think sometimes that can help with the guilt of it when you remove yourself slightly, not forever, and think, who else am I? What else do I enjoy? What other conversations can I have with my friends, my colleagues? How do I stop just like, how do I get off the hamster wheel that is just going to make this problem worse? Because again, at the end of the day, like, we want fosters and animal welfare professionals around for a long time. Like, we need them. We need them to keep this mission going. And it is a big one. So taking those, like, that removal, that step away in order to come back even stronger is so important for me. And I've had to do this myself. Like, that quote, which is one of my favorites, is you can't pour from an empty cup. Like, if your cup is empty in the animal welfare from that, like, how do you refill it with things that aren't that? And then last, like, evaluate your surroundings. And of course, your community is one of those things. And saying, maybe to friends who are part of this community, like, hey guys, can we just like talk about something else? Can we think about something else? Can we try something else? Is one thing. And I would again say, what media are you consuming? Is your, now with algorithms and stuff, like, you watch one video on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, whatever it is, about a dog getting rescued, all you will see is like sad, 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 sadder, keeps getting sadder. The worst thing you've ever seen in your whole life. Like, you know what I mean? And so I have certainly had to recognize that and make some different choices. And lastly, I would say, like, remember that people are inherently good. Like, yes, we see in shelters really sad cases. We see animals getting left behind. We see some of the worst things ever. But I have to go outside sometimes when I walk my own dogs and remember there are other people with their dogs or their cats who love them just as much as I love mine. It's not me on an island who loves my dogs and my cat the most and everyone else is doing the work. It's like you have to go and kind of like reorient yourself. And I think in animal welfare it can be really hard when you're day to day, it can feel really negative. But at the end of the day, like people are inherently good. We're seeing all these statistics. More and more people are getting animals. Like more and more people are spending money on animals. Like that is a thing that is happening statistically, but we don't see that, right? We don't see that in our day to day. We see animals getting abandoned. We see litters of puppies coming in that should have, that came from a backyard breed. Like, we see it, and it's hard to step away from that. And I think the only way to do that is to just like reevaluate your surroundings and what you're exposing yourself to again, even if it's temporary.
Sure. And I think that idea of making sure we keep in mind that perspective, even when
Mhm.
we are so focused on this one dog who has been gone through whatever their past is so that
Yeah.
they're here and we see them struggling and we're frustrated with the system and the situation and all of that, to keep that perspective in mind that this is a micro, but we have to look at the macro side of things. I
Mhm.
completely agree with that. I
Mhm.
will say recently we had Dr. Jennifer Merlot from Fear Free. She was an expert interviewee to share some insights with us here. And I've heard you share before that some of the fear free principles that we apply towards the animals can similarly be applied towards the other fosters, the volunteer staff. Can you touch on that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So Fear Free talks a lot about reducing fear, anxiety, and stress. And of course, that a lot of it is specific to animals. But I think the same, and I know the same can be and should be applied to people. So I would say, as an individual, thinking, are my actions or reactions, whatever it is, increasing fear, anxiety, and stress in the people? And if so, how can I show up a little bit differently? And the way that you can evaluate that, just like you would in any other scenario, but like, you know, are you using calm voices, which is what we talk about to do with animals, right? Are you, giving the benefit of the doubt? Like, are you seeing signs where you go to talk to somebody and they look really nervous and they're like, I just, they're trying to say the right thing. Again, I'm not saying this like people are monsters, but I would say because most times in animal welfare, people are coming from such different backgrounds and even economic statuses and like all these things. But like to really think about like, is my actions causing greater fear, anxiety, and stress in other people? And if I am, what can I do and what fear free principles can I bring into place? Never underestimate a good treat, just like we do for animals, right? All we talk about is treats. Can you bring something in for the staff to say thank you? Can you be the person who is helping reduce that among the staff and the volunteer community or the foster community, and ultimately just bringing it back to like this is going to benefit the animals, like having more fosters, having staff that aren't burnt out, like having a calmer environment is ultimately going to benefit the animals in our care, and I think for whatever reason we are, as animal people, like we're zoned in on that with animals. Like I think you see people who are like, if you even slightly raise a voice to be like sit down, people are like too loud, no, oh. But then I'll see staff go to another person and be like, what are you doing? And you're like, what is happening right now? Like, and just remember, like all of those vibes, those feelings that you're putting out into the universe, you're putting to other people, like the next animal that interacts with them, they're going to feel that, just like we talk about, right? Like as a person, if you are feeling stressed or sad, like we always talk about, that's such so great about animals, right? They feel that and they want to help us. Or if you hear about people who are like have a lot of anxiety, their pets sometimes have a lot of anxiety and a lot of nervousness. Like the same happens when we transfer those feelings person to person and then that person to an animal. So shelters are inherently stressful, even though we're all doing great things to try and make them less so. Let's not be a thing that adds more stress to that. Like the people should not be the thing adding the stress, right? Like they're the ones who are there to care for them. Let's just let them be stressed because of the situation. Let's not make it worse for them by creating stress, by not having a community that we can be open and vulnerable with, or that we can give feedback in a way that's constructive. Like I think that that's just, so helpful. And I think anything that you read on Fear Free with Fear Free of like I said, give treats, read body language, like talk in low voices, give the animals breaks. Like these are all things that if you think about, like can be put into staff and can be put into volunteers. Breaks, treats, you know what I mean? Like those are all similar things. And it seems so silly, but it's quite applicable. You don't
Who
even
doesn't want a
language.
treat at the end of the
Yeah.
day or breaks, etc.?
Or a
So
break.
yeah,
Yeah.
when you say it that way, it makes complete sense. Tori, what I really appreciate that you're bringing into this conversation is on one side, you're bringing this perspective. You're talking about reframing the way we go into some of these very common interactions. And then you're also doing a great job of highlighting very practical tips and things we can alter, adjust. As we're beginning to wrap up this conversation, I was just curious if there's any more insights that you'd like to share during our time together.
I think, the last thing I really just want to, I think hammer home is, the community aspect of it. At the end of the day, an animal welfare organization is a microcosm within the world within animal welfare. Do, as anybody listening here, like do what you can to build that up and be a really positive part of that. I think that's really, really important to me. And kind of in that same vein, I would say, as a foster volunteer specifically, understand what the organization's mission is and what they're capable of, and kind of what volunteering with them looks like. Because I've worked at a really, really large organization. We had thousands, 3,000 plus fosters. We were very well resourced. We had a humongous building. We had hundreds of staff. I mean, just on my team, I had 100 plus people of veterinary professionals. That doesn't always work with the foster that would be coming to us, right? They would be like, but we want more FaceTime. We want to understand every single medical decision. We want to be able to pick like which foster pets we take and for how long. Like they had some struggles with some decisions about outcomes that they didn't agree with. All of that is okay. And it's also okay to say like, you're doing great work, but that doesn't quite work for me. Is it maybe more of a home-based rescue would be a better fit where you can have a lot more FaceTime. You're a bigger fish in a smaller pond, right?
Yeah.
That is all okay. All of these animals need help. All these organizations need help. Finding the right fit for you is so important. Don't try to fit, square peg round hole. Not everyone wants to be one of 3,000. They want to be maybe one of 25. And I think that's really important, as well as how outcomes are decided. There's lots of different types of shelters. There's government shelters, socially conscious shelters, no-kill shelters. I'm sure I'm forgetting many more. Those are the top 3 I can think of. But like, be really clear of how they make their decisions, and be okay with that. And it's okay to also not be okay with it, but then know when to say like, I just don't think this is the right fit for me. I'm going to go help over here. It's all helping. So I think that's my last like piece I would encourage folks is it's okay to make a different choice and it's okay to not agree, but then how can you use your emotional energy and your currency to maybe find a better fit for you? I think that's something that not everyone is given that option. They don't always think that's an option, right? They don't want to quit. So I think that's my last piece that I would just be like, just think about it,
Well, that's your last piece, but actually, now that you're saying that, I'm like, that's such a big piece because as a new fosterer, I thought fostering is fostering is fostering. And then I came to realize I'm so grateful I had a chance to be involved with a large city animal shelter. And because of that, I was more involved with the marketing of the dogs and the meeting of the potential adopters. But when I started working with a more small, urban-based humane society, then you do get more of that face time with the staff, and they actually have the conversations with the adopters. And so that was such a change for me versus working with a very small local rescue, family-based rescue, and what that looked like. So that was a misconception that I really had on my side is I didn't realize the responsibilities look different. The engagement with the staff looks different. Those were things that I hadn't taken into account. So that one small point that you made at the beginning really can impact what your experience looks like. And similar to what you said, it's not that there's a right or a wrong. It's a matter of figuring out what is your preference and which organization works well. Or sometimes, like me, adjusting which one I'm fostering with when I have different needs in different seasons of my life.
Right.
So
Well, and I think
powerful
that
point.
sometimes that can if having that knowledge can help impact what kind of burnout you feel, right? Like I said that example in the beginning of like you foster this dog and then it gets adopted and you just like hope it's for the best forever, you know. But if that's a source of real struggle for you when it comes to fostering, being the one who gets to be part of the adoption and do the paperwork and maybe even say like I'd love to see pictures, you know. I mean, you hear these stories like that where you're like, you know, the first dog I ever fostered, I was on their Christmas card list for years and years. Like you know what I mean? But
Yes.
and I think if that is a source of burnout for you where you're like, I don't know if I can foster because the not knowing is too stressful for me and that makes me feel like I have to hold them all or I need to adopt them all. If that's a point of contention for you, the organization just might be not the right fit for you. And doing something, you know, family-based rescue or working with an organization that needs that hands-on support to do the adoption, that might solve some of those feelings, which is going to make you a better foster and is going to make you, you know, here for the long run. And I'll just say one more point on that. Sometimes people will say like, well, the government shelters are the ones that need the most help, let's say, because they have the least resources, whatever. Maybe, but where do they have other rescues that pull from that organization? And, you know, do they have other organizations that are taking their pets and getting them adopted out? It could be that you don't have to be in the government shelter to make that impact. You could say, hey, I'd love to know what rescues you guys work with. Oh, it's these 5. Maybe this is a better fit for me. I mean, I just think that sometimes people get really focused on like, if I'm going to help, I'm going to help the most. That same dog that went into that government shelter as a investigations case or, you know, some horrible thing, then went to a rescue, which then can be you're helping the same dog just because you're not at the shelter, you know. So I think just getting really informed in those types of things is really, really important and really helpful. And it's going to save you hopefully a lot of stress or some of these emotional conversations even that you're having. It could just be the wrong fit. And that's okay too. You're still helping no matter where you land.
Yeah, it's just exposure and coming to an understanding of what the options are. I think that is an
Yeah.
excellent call out. Tori, if listeners want to follow your work or learn more about compassion fatigue or emotional sustainability, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah. I would say follow me on LinkedIn. You can just look up Tori Williams. I would just also give a shout out to Fear Free. They are building more and more shelter resources. I've worked with them quite a bit. And from there, if you want to just message me on LinkedIn, I would love to chat with you more about your specific scenario and help you get to the right resources or the right professionals that could be a great ongoing, you know, follow for you or whatever.
Wonderful. We'll be sure to include a link to the show notes to the fear-free educational programs. I know we've mentioned them before, that they are a great, amazing resource that's out there in the world. Tori, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, I love this topic. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. I hope it's really impactful, and I'm confident that it is.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Dog Fostering 101, everything I wish I knew when I began fostering. This episode was edited by Make Your Day Richer. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to follow us and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Now go cuddle a pup and have a great day.